I read this headline that said that personal stress worldwide is at near record levels. That's what it said. Near record levels. That personal stress is the highest it's been since World War II. So I decided to do a little bit of research on this, and I discovered that suicide has now passed car crashes as the number one injury death in America. The number one injury death in America is now suicide. I read another statistic as I was preparing that said that the top 7 stresses in life are, and here they are, and you probably nod your head, right? For most of us. Here's the top 7 stresses. Number 1 is your job. I bet you thought it was going to be your pastor. But anyway, number 1 is, it says your job. Number 2 is money. Number 3 is health. And then it goes relationships. Poor diet is a cause of stress. Media overload. Lack of sleep. And driving on Route 7. No, I made that last one up, but it stresses me out. Maybe you could identify with one or more of those. Maybe you could identify with this note. Let me read you this note. Pastor, a few weeks ago, I went to a doctor for some chronic aches and pains that seemed to be getting worse. I don't sleep well, and I live in a constant state of fatigue. So I told my doctor that I'd started a business some years ago that had become very successful, but I now just force myself to go into work. This person says, I feel overwhelmed, I feel overloaded, and so my doctor asked me to list the stresses in my life and then think of some of the possible ways to reduce those stresses. Then I could write down a plan of attack. This person writes this. I would like to know what the Bible says about managing stress. Today, we're going to look at the classic text in the Bible on how to keep from stressing out. Now, we've been going through a series in a book of the Bible called the book of Philippians, which is the happiest, most joyful book in the Bible. And we've been going through it a verse at a time. And we've made our way to chapter 4. And so we're going to read chapter 4 of Philippians, verses 6 through 13. It'll be on the screen. And see if you can spot in the writing here that there are 5 anti-stress management techniques. Verse 6 through 13. Let me read it. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put it into practice. And the God of peace will be with you. I rejoiced greatly in the Lord that at last you renewed your concern for me. Indeed, you were concerned, but you had no opportunity to show it. I'm not saying this because I am in need, for I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty, and I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all things through him who gives me strength. That's quite a familiar passage for anyone who's been in the church for a while, and I want to help you understand a little bit more about it, and particularly to put a couple of verses into their proper context, especially that last one that Steph Curry thinks helps him shoot more baskets. But verse 7 is the key verse. Let me show it to you in the Living Bible. It says this. This is the promise of a guarantee. What's this? It says, if you do these things, you will experience God's peace. Do you see this? It says if you just do these things, that I'm going to tell you, you will experience God's peace, which is far more wonderful than the human mind can understand. And then he says, his peace, that's God's peace, will keep your thoughts quiet and your heart at rest. You see that? This is what's known as the peace that passes understanding. Now, how do you know if you have a peace that passes understanding? Well, it happens when you're in a situation where you have no logical reason to be at peace. You know, where everything in life seems to be going wrong. There's chaos all around you, right? Things are in total meltdown. You know, there's stress everywhere to be seen. Nothing is going right. And yet, you have this peace in the inside. What is that? That's the peace that passes understanding. And it's something that God says that he guarantees to you. He guarantees that to you. Now, would you like that? Would you like more of that? Would you like to have your thoughts quiet and your heart at rest, like it says here? Yes? Anyone? Yes. Well, God promises this. He promises a more peaceful, a less stressed out mind and body. But here's the thing. The Bible has about 7,000 promises in it. But with many, if not most of the promises, the promise comes with a premise. The promise comes with a premise. God says, if you do this, then I'll do this. In other words, there's a condition. I want you to circle the premise for the promise. And it's these first words, if you do these things. Circle that in your notes or in your Bible. If you do these things, it'll stop you from stressing out. And you will experience God's peace, and your thoughts will be quiet, and your heart will be at rest. All right, so what things? What are the things that I have to do to have less stress, according to the Bible? And there are 5 of them, so let's get right into it. And you can write these in your notes. Number 1, the first thing we have to do, super easy. What's this? Number 1, refuse to worry about anything. That's the first thing. You want your stress to go down? You have to refuse to worry about anything. Why? Because the number 1 source of stress in your life is worry. It's not your husband or your wife. It's not your kids. It's not work. It's worrying about your husband or your wife or your kids about work. Right? Because here's the thing. You can put 2 people in the identical situation and one will become better and the other will become bitter. And the only difference is not the situation, but the person. There are many things in life you do not get to control, your circumstances being the large part of it, but you do get to respond according to your will. It's not your work that's stressing you out. It's worrying about your work that's stressing you out. Now, God in the Bible here in this passage, verse 6, the first part, says it very clearly. Look at this, 4 verse 6. Never worry about anything. Can I ask you a question? Is there any wiggle room in that verse? No. Is there any exception? No. Is there any exemption? No. Is there any reason where God says it's okay to worry in a circumstance? Is there any occasion where God says, on this occasion, I'll grant you worry? None. There are no exceptions and no exemptions. The Bible says, don't worry about anything. Now, that's a pretty big blanket statement. And you might say, well, what about no? Well, you know, but what when no? He says, never worry about anything. Now, Jesus thought that worry was such an important topic that he spent a major section of his most famous sermon That sermon's called the Sermon on the Mount. It's the most famous sermon ever. And he thought worry was so important, he spent a major part of that sermon talking about worry. And so if you'll follow with me, I want to do this as quickly as I can. We're going to sidestep from Philippians into the Sermon on the Mount. And I'll show you what Jesus said about worry. Write these things down. Jesus said this. The first one is that worry is unreasonable. We looked at this a few months ago, but let me review it real quick. He said, worry is unreasonable. What do I mean by that? It's illogical. It doesn't actually make sense. And he says this in Matthew 6, verse 25. Follow me. He says, don't worry about your life with these few exceptions. No, he just says, don't worry about your life. What you'll eat or drink, about your body, what you'll wear. Is not life more important than food, and the body more important than clothes? When he says this, what he's meaning is, this is illogical. He says, you've got priorities out of order. It's irrational. It doesn't make any sense. Worrying is unreasonable, and I'll tell you why. Let me give you two, here's the subpoint to the subpoint to the side point. Two reasons why worry is unreasonable. And the first, maybe if you've got extra space to write it somewhere, is that worry is unreasonable because what it does is it exaggerates the problem. Right? Worrying about something never makes a problem smaller, which is weird because somehow we think if I worry about it, then I have it under control, right? That, and it's like, hey, let me worry about it. And the person will be like, no, because you won't. And there's this thought, like, as long as one of us is worrying about it, we got it covered. But the thing is, I've never worried about something to make it smaller. I never worried it away. Right? I've never worried it out of existence. Every time you worry about something, you make it bigger. You know why? Because that which you focus on, you multiply. Right? That which you focus on, you multiply. It's like, I've used this analogy before. When you use a spyglass, no, that's not what it's called, a magnifying glass, and you put it over the words, does it make the words bigger? No, it doesn't make the words bigger. It makes them appear to be bigger through the lens with which you look. By the way, that's why we're supposed to magnify the Lord. Scripture says, magnify the Lord, all you people. And when we magnify the Lord, are we making God bigger? No, you can't make God any bigger, but you are making God appear to be bigger in your circumstances. See, it's all about the lens. It's all about the lens through which you look. So he says, look, it's unreasonable because the more you worry, what it does is it exaggerates, makes the problem bigger. And not only that, it's unreasonable because it doesn't work. It doesn't work. It's worthless. To worry, and here's why it's worthless. Follow me. To worry about something that you cannot change is useless. But to worry about something that you can change is stupid. Because just go change it. So worrying about things you can't change, I call that stewing without doing. Sit, soak, and sour. And to worry about something that you can change is dumb. Just go change it. So he says it's unreasonable. The next thing Jesus says is that worry is unnatural. Why? Because in the entire universe, the only creations of God who worry are human beings. Birds don't worry. Cows don't worry. Dogs and cats don't worry. Well, cats, who knows what they're thinking. Telling you, every time, don't you think when you look at a cat, they just look like they're plotting your demise? If they ever evolve opposable thumbs, I tell you, we're out of here. But nothing else worries. Nothing. And that's what he goes on to say in Matthew 6, verse 26. He says, look at the birds of the air. They don't sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they? What he's saying is, it's not natural to worry. You were not born a worrier. You learned it. Now, I know some of you, and some of you are champions at worry. Some of you, if there was an Olympic medal in worrying, you'd be competing for gold. You love to worry. Well, you don't love it, but you indulge it. But you weren't born like that. Babies don't born worrying. You learned it. And so the good news is that if you learned it, you can unlearn it. And he says, look, the birds, they don't worry about anything. And God looks after them. And then he goes on, just in case, birds is not your thing, he moves to plants. Verse 28, verse 29. He says, and why worry about clothes? Look at the field lilies. They don't worry about theirs. And yet King Solomon, he was this great king in the Old Testament who had lots of money and lots of nice things. And he says King Solomon, in all of his glory, was never clothed as beautifully as those lilies. So he uses birds and he uses plants, and he says, they don't worry. You people, you human beings are the only thing that worries. So worry is unnatural. As I think about it, it's also unhealthy. That's not one of my points, but it should have been. It's unhealthy, and this is proven that your body, I'm reading a book right now, it's called Your Body Keeps a Score. Your body keeps a score, and it's about overcoming trauma and other sort of psychological things, but it talks about the effects that your physical body keeps according to what's in your spirit and in your psyche. And we know this. Doctors tell us this all the time. I've read about doctors who say, that a high percentage of people in hospitals could get up and walk out if they would just learn to deal with guilt, resentment, and bitterness. But it manifests in other ways. Chronic migraines, backache, ulcers, and all kinds of things. But the root of the problem, the physical root, is actually an emotional one. Let me show you a couple of proverbs from the Bible. Proverbs 12 and verse 25 says, an anxious heart weighs a man down. And you all know that. You've all had that experience of lying awake at night, feeling anxious and feeling heavy, feeling weighed down, feeling pushed down, feeling depressed. That's what that means. An anxious heart weighs you down. The word worry actually comes from an old English word which means to strangle or to choke. That's where worry comes from, and we have, I'm sure, all experience what that feels like, where you can barely catch a breath because the worry that you're doing is choking the life out of your life. But let me show you another proverb that is the opposite. Proverbs 14 and verse 30 says, a heart of peace gives life to the body. A heart of peace gives life to the body. And they're proving that to be true now as well. And they're proving that it releases certain immunoboosters. That you're physically and mentally healthier when you are at peace. So Jesus said that it's unreasonable, it's unnatural. The third thing he says about worry, write this down, is that worry is unhelpful. It's unhelpful. Worry cannot make you an inch taller. It can't make you an inch shorter. Worry can't make you, take 10 inches off your waist. Worry doesn't work, in other words. Worry doesn't change the past. It can't control the future. All that worry does is it messes up today. That's all it does. So in the Sermon on the Mount, we're in verse 27, Matthew 6:27. Who of you by worrying can add a single hour to his life? Worrying, I like to picture, it's like sitting in a rocking chair. That's what worry is. You spend a lot of energy and you go nowhere. That's what worry is like. And the only thing that worry does, I said it doesn't change the past, doesn't change the future, but it changes you, and not for the better. A person who's a chronic worrier is a chronic miser. They're miserable because it never solved a problem. So it's unhelpful. And the fourth thing Jesus says is that worry is unnecessary. It's unnecessary. Now, the reason we worry is because we think it is necessary. But according to God, his question to you this morning would be, what in the world are you worried about? Don't you think I'll take care of you? And listen, this is where it comes to. This is the nub of the issue, is do you not believe that you have a Father who loves you, who will take care of you? Because when you worry, write this down somewhere, worry is being a practical atheist. I'm coming at you straight today. Worry is practical atheism. When you worry, what you're really saying is, I don't believe that God will look after me. I don't trust that the Father in heaven will care for me. That's what you're saying. And you're acting as if you don't believe. Jesus said this in verse 30. He says, if God cares so wonderfully for flowers that are here today and gone tomorrow, won't he more surely care for you? So the first step in stress management, according to the Bible, is to refuse to worry about things. Why? Because it's unhelpful, it's unreasonable, it's unnatural, it's unnecessary, bonus point, unhealthy. And in this other verse in the Bible, in 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 7, Peter was one of the followers of Jesus. He wrote a book and he said this. He said, unload all your worries on God, since He is looking after you. Unload all your worries. I love that word unload, because literally in the original Greek language that the Bible was written in, that word unload literally means just drop it. That's what it means. It means it doesn't mean like throw it like a baseball or throw it like a rock across the lake. It literally means just drop it. And so God in this verse is saying, you know all that stuff that's stressing you out? You know that stuff at work and that relationship and those kids and all that and your health? He said, just drop it with Jesus, because He takes care of you. So what do? You do the next step. He says, first of all, he says, never worry about anything because it doesn't do any good. And then you do the next step. And the second thing, number of their 5 points, is this. It's the first part of verse 6. After you don't worry about anything, then you have to, number 2, talk to God about everything. Number 1, don't worry about anything. But then, number 2, talk to God about everything. Because here's your choices. Whenever you encounter something at work stresses you out, whenever your kids, go off the rails, whenever you have an argument at home, here's your choices. And there's only 2. You can either panic or you can pray. You can either worry or you can worship. That'll be your choices every time. And so here's what I'd encourage you to do. Stop talking to yourself about everything and talk it out with God. Did you hear what I said? Because you talk to yourself, right? We all talk to ourselves. That inner voice where we're trying to figure it out and work it through and analyze what's going on. And you know what you're doing at that point? Worrying. That constant dialogue in your mind of what's going to happen and how am I going to pay for that and how will we figure it out and what if he says this and she does that and I need to figure and manipulate and cajole. That's worry. Stop talking to yourself in your head about it all the time and verbalize it, get it out of yourself by talking it out to God. It's the next part of verse 6. We're back to Philippians 4. Verse 6, he starts off, he says, never worry about anything. That's the first point. Instead, he says, in every situation, I've circled that, in every situation, let God know what your need is in prayer, in your prayers. Never worry, but instead, pray about it. Talk to God about it. And if you prayed as much as you worried, you'd have a whole lot less to worry about in the first place. Why? Because prayer can do anything God can do. That's good. Hashtag that. Prayer can do anything that God can do. Prayer is our method by which we engage with God and petition Him. When I was a kid, anytime I wanted something or anytime I needed something, I'd go talk to my mom about it. I was brought up single family home and we didn't have much. We grew up in poverty pretty much. Didn't know it because you don't know that when you're in it. And but anytime I wanted something or needed something, I just went to my mom and I'd say, "Hey, Mom, I need this." And I can distinctly remember asking for things, and not once as a kid, not once when I said, "Mom, I need this," not once did I ever worry about where my mom was going to get the money. Never once. And yet we were very poor. And I'm not saying I got everything I asked for. I'm just saying that when I asked, it never struck me to even consider where your parents would find the answer to that problem. You know why? Because that was not my job. It was my mom's job to figure out where the money was going to come from. It was just my job as a kid to ask. And it is not your job to figure out how God's going to do it in your life. That's not your job. It is your job to ask. Ask. Ask your Heavenly Father. Say, Father, I need help. I need this. I have this issue. I have this problem. I have this bill I need to pay. And you don't have to figure it out or say, well, maybe God will do it like this. Let God figure out how He's going to do it. And the more you do that, the more He'll surprise you. The more unique He'll find ways to make it come your way. And you'll be like, are you kidding me? That had to be God. And sometimes I talk to people and they say, well, I don't want to bother God with this little thing. Because you're like, I'm worrying about it, but it's not that big a thing. Listen, if it's big enough to worry about, then it's big enough to pray about. Plus, when you say, I don't want to bother God with this little thing, come on, everything is a little thing to God. Even the ones you think are the big ones are still little to Him. So there's nothing too little to ask of God. The Bible says in James chapter 4 and verse 2, it says, you do not have because you do not ask God. I don't know how this works exactly, but I would be so disappointed to get to heaven and to find that there was a warehouse full of things that God had planned to give me if I'd only asked. Wouldn't that be so disappointing? If St. Peter, because it's always St. Peter that gives you the tour and all the jokes. If he opened a door and showed you in and there were just aisles and aisles, it's like Amazon for heaven. Just aisles and aisles of pre-packaged boxes of glory and wonderment. And you say, what's all that? Peter says, well, that's the toilet roll supply. No, it's not. That's all the things that you could have had if you just asked. You say, well, is that how God works? I don't know if that's how that's going to work, but I do know that God wants to have a relationship with you. You think, well, is God really concerned that much with my life because He's got a whole universe to run? There's a lot of things that happen, and there's wars and craziness. Let me show you this verse from Romans chapter 8 and verse 32. Romans 8, verse 32 says this. Since God did not spare even His own Son, but gave Him up for us all, won't He also, who gave us Christ, give us everything else that we need? What's he saying here? I want you to make sure you follow the logic of this. Because your biggest problem in life, your biggest need, the greatest need you've ever had and ever will have, is a need to have your sins forgiven and to have a purpose for living and a home in heaven. That is your greatest need you'll ever have. And he says, look, God came up with a plan. And He came in His Son, Jesus Christ, in human form to live your life and to die your death. He took the punishment for your sin that you might have entrance into heaven. Not that you earn it, but that He gives you a free ticket. It's called grace. And so the logic of this verse is saying, if God took care of the greatest need you'll ever have, will He not also help you pay that bill that you have to pay? Will He not also help you overcome that anger? Will He not also help you repair that relationship? If He is going to do the greatest need you've ever needed, the other stuff is but small stuff. He can help you with your career decision. He can open doors where no one else can open doors. But we got to stop worrying about everything, and we got to start talking to God about it. And then the third thing, number 3, about stress, he says, and then thank God in all things. Worry about nothing, pray about everything, and thank God in all things. This is good. We still haven't got out of verse 6. Don't worry. But in Philippians 4, verse 6, he says, when you ask God for what you need, also thank Him for all He's done. When you ask God for what you need, also thank Him for what He's done. It's not very polite, is it, to just be asking all the time for stuff? We teach our kids to say please and thank you. And if your prayer life is just a list and laundry of all your wants without any gratitude, he says, no, when you're asking, make sure you're also being thankful. However, I think one of the key words here is the word when he says for. Or where he doesn't say, he doesn't say thank God for all things. Because there's a lot of things not to be thankful for. Because there's evil in the world, right? Somebody gets cancer, you don't thank God for that. Somebody dies, you don't thank God for their death. But what he does say is, in all things give thanks. In all things give thanks. Which means that even in the bad times, I can find something good. Let me show you another version of this. The English Standard Version translation says, always ask with a thankful heart. Now, I'm not going to belabor this point because twice already in the series we talked about the connection between gratitude and happiness, that you cannot be happy and ungrateful at the same time, that happy people are grateful and unhappy people are ungrateful, and study after study has shown that the healthiest emotion that a human being can have is the attitude of gratitude. Listen, we live in the greatest country in the world at the greatest time in history, and I mean that as a Scotsman. I say that America is the greatest idea ever conceived, and that we're living at the most privileged time that there's ever been in human history. And I don't even just mean in America. But you go look up all the stats about world poverty, about literacy rates, about equality, about everything. We're living at the greatest time there's ever been in human history. If you cannot think of something to be grateful for, you need a slap around the head. And I'm not saying there's not hard things in your life. But even in the hard things, there's always something to be grateful for and to thank God for. I can always find some. Let me try and illustrate this. Let's imagine a pair of railroad tracks, right? Everyone imagine that in your mind. We've got this long line, this railroad track, and that's representative of your life, okay? And in your life, you have these two rails at the same time. One rail is all the good things that are happening in your life, and the other rail is all the bad things that are happening in your life. And I used to think that life that life is just a series of hills and valleys, mountaintops, and then low times, and you have all these good times, and then you have bad times. And then I thought, that's not really true. The fact is, you get both of them at the same time all of your life. In other words, there's no time in your life when everything is good and there's nothing bad in your life. And there's no time in your life where everything is bad and nothing is good in your life. Even when you feel that way. Listen, one person said that depression is an inability to conceive a future. That's one of the problems, is when you're in that dark place, is you think that it will always be such and that you cannot see any other way out of it. But even there, if you look hard, you'll see there's something to be grateful for. By the way, this is what the Bible says in 1 Thessalonians 5 and verse 18. It's similar, and it says, in everything give thanks, for this is the will of God in Christ Jesus for you. In everything, circle that. In everything. It doesn't say in most things. It says in everything, but it also does not say for everything. For everything. No, because there's bad stuff. But in everything, give thanks. Now, notice the second part of the verse. Because people ask me this question all the time. They say, hey, Pastor, I'm trying to figure out what God's will for my life is. Hey, Pastor, I'm trying to figure out, what does God want me to do? What is his will for my life? Well, look what this verse says. In everything gives thanks, for this is the will of God for you. This is the will of God for you. And before God is going to show you step 2 of his will for your life, you need to take step 1. Yes, God has a will and He has a plan for your life. He has a plan for your marriage, for your career, for your education. God has a specific plan for your life, but He says, let's start with the general plan. And the general plan is that you give thanks for everything. And then once we got that, then I'll tell you step 2. You got to learn to give thanks in every circumstance. All right, let's review. Worry about nothing. Pray about everything. Give thanks in all things. And then number 4, the fourth thing about handling stress is you have to think about good things. Think about good things. This is so important when it comes to handling stress, because the war that you have with stress in your life, the battle of stress, listen to me everybody, the battle of stress that you're facing every day is between your ears. The battle is in your head, it's in your mind. The war on stress is a war that's won and lost in your mind. And what you fill your mind with will determine the level of stress in your life. If you want to have peace in your mind, you have to start controlling what you allow in your mind. You see, most people, their mind is like a freeway. Anything can just drive through it. Most people, they don't set up a filter. There's no filter on their brain. There's no parameters on the brain. There's no buffer on the brain that says that these things are allowed in and these things are not. Most people's brain is just an open channel. And so that mind is filled with poison, and it is filled with garbage, and it's filled with all this stuff. And just like a computer, garbage in, garbage out. Whatever you put in your mind is going to come out in your life. You go see certain movies you shouldn't see. You watch certain shows you shouldn't watch. You read certain novels you shouldn't read. You listen to gossip that you shouldn't listen to. You let all of that into your mind. Listen, everyone's talking right now. They're worried about water pollution. They're worried about food pollution. They're worried about air pollution. I don't hear anyone talking about mind pollution. That's the biggest problem in America. It's the climate of your brain that needs cleaned up. See, if we could just clean up the climate here, maybe we can take care of some of the other ones out there. Philippians 4 verse 8, I said, you got to think about the right things. He says this. Now, this verse would make a whole series of studies on its own, but let me just show you that he says there are 8 tests, we're not going to go through, but there are 8 tests on whether you should allow something into your brain or not. What's this? Verse 8. Fill your minds with things that are, and you can circle these if you want, true and good and right. And then he says, think about things that are pure and beautiful and respected. If anything is excellent, if anything is worthy of honor, think about those things. Did you see that he listed 8 tests of what you should allow into your brain? The problem is, look at Proverbs 14 and verse 9. Here's the problem, is most people do this. Fools make fun of sin. Fools make fun of sin. And that's what we have now, is a society that laughs at, that laughs and enjoys. Most comedies based on this, many movies and TV shows, they're based on things that even 30 or 40 years ago would never have been allowed on TV. But now, it's so funny. Look how he killed those 55 people in one room. Oh, have you seen that new show? It's so great. This guy's got like 5 girlfriends at the same time. He's having sex with them all. It's so good. You should check it out. Seen that movie? I mean, there's cussing like every sentence, but it's really good. You should watch it. Garbage in, garbage out. And in the book of Isaiah in the Bible, chapter 26, verse 3, it says, you, Lord, will keep in perfect peace all who trust in you and whose thoughts are fixed on you. You want to put the stress down in your life? Start putting the stressful things that are in your brain out and start putting your focus more on God. It's that simple. It's that simple. Think about the right things. And number 5, the 5th thing this passage tells us about stress management is you have to learn to be content with anything. This is the 5th key. Learn to be content. Now, let me explain contentment. Because a lot of people think, they misunderstand what contentment is. A lot of people think that contentment means that I have no ambition. Right? That's what people think. Well, if I'm going to learn to be content, that means I'm just sort of like sitting back and resting on what I have, and I have no ambition. That is not what contentment means. By the way, this book that we're studying was written by a guy named Paul, who is an incredibly ambitious person. This was a man who always had a plan. He was traveling all over the known world at the time, preaching the good news of Jesus, planting churches. He always had his next plan. He was a man who was full of ambition, and yet he says, I've learned to be content. So let me clarify that. Contentment doesn't mean that I have no ambition. Contentment does not mean laziness. Contentment does not mean apathy. Contentment does not mean complacency. Contentment is not fatalism either. That kind of like, hey, whatever will be, will be. No. But here, let me tell you what contentment is. Contentment is enjoying what I have right now rather than waiting on something else to happen in order for me to be happy. Sometimes I say it like this. Contentment does not come from getting what I want. It comes from wanting what I've got. And I'll say it again. Contentment does not come from getting what I want. It comes from wanting what I've got. And as long as you keep living, I've told you this so many times, in the someday I'ls, the if then I'll be happy, when that happens, then I'll be happy. When I finally get married, then I'll be happy. When I finally have a kid, then I'll be happy. When I finally get a job, then I'll be happy. When the kid leaves the house, then I'll be happy. When I retire, then I'll be happy. As long as you're living that way, you'll never actually be happy. Contentment is learning to appreciate and enjoy where you are and not be relying on something that's still to happen to find happiness. And therefore, it's the opposite of coveting. In the Bible, there's this thing called the 10 Commandments, and one of them, people forget this one, says, do not covet your neighbor's things. That's one of the 10 Commandments. It's right there with murder, steal, and adultery. Don't covet. And what is covet? Covet is jealously wanting what other people have. And contentment is the opposite of coveting. And so my joy is not based, or my happiness is not based on my happenings. My joy is not based on my current circumstances. I'm not waiting on something to happen before I can be happy. Now, this is not from me. This is from Paul. What's this? Verse 11, Philippians 4. Paul says this, I have learned, circle that, I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances. And the reason I say circle that is because contentment is not natural. You are not by nature content. You got to learn it. He says, I've learned to be content whatever the circumstances. I know how to live on almost nothing. And I know how to live with everything. In the original Greek language, he says, I've learned to live in poverty and I've learned to live in luxury. He says, I know them both. And I can be happy in either. He said, when I was in poverty, I was happy. When I had lots, I was also happy. Because my happiness is not attached to my happenings. Then he says, I've learned the secret of contentment in every situation, whether I'm well fed or hungry, and whether I have more than I need or I don't have enough. So how do I learn to be content? Learn to be content. How do I learn it? Let me give you a couple of ways as we move towards the end. Let me give you 3 ways. It's not on the slides. Maybe you can write this in somewhere. How do you be content? Well, the first thing you can do is stop comparing. Stop comparing. The source of all discontent is comparison. And the Bible says over and over again that it's stupid and that it is dumb and it is foolish to compare yourself to anybody else. By the way, here I go again, subpoints to the subpoint. Well, why is it foolish to compare yourself to someone else? 2 reasons. Because when you compare yourself to someone else, you'll always find somebody who's doing a better job than you, or who's more talented than you, or who's better looking than you, or has a bigger house than you, or whatever. And whenever you compare and you find someone who's doing it better than you, then you'll feel disappointed. Or you'll find somebody that you're doing better than them. And you've got more talent than them, or more money than them, or you're better looking than them, and then you'll be full of pride. And disappointment and pride are the 2 things that will take you out the race. So never compare yourself to someone else. That is the death of contentment. By the way, why would you compare yourself anyway? Why do we do that? Because God says, you're unique, you're special, there's no one else like you in all the world. Genuinely, there's no one else like you. Nobody ever in history has been exactly like you. When God made you, He broke the mold. You are a unique masterpiece. And when you get to heaven, God's not going to say, hey, why were you not more like your sister? Hey, why were you not more like your mom and dad? God's just going to say, why were you not more like you? Why are you not just the person that I made you to be? Because that's the person that I love. Proverbs 14 and verse 30 says, peace of mind makes the body healthy, but envy is like a cancer. So stop comparing yourself. That will make you discontent. The second thing you can do to learn contentment is to stop thinking that having more is better. This is good. Stop thinking that having more is better. There are, this is my day for all these subpoints. There are 3 myths that advertising is telling you every day. Right? Commercials. 3 myths that they tell you every day that having more will make me more happy, that having more will make me more important, and that having more will make me more secure. All of those are lies. Right? None of those are true. Having more will not make you more happy. There's plenty of people in Hollywood have everything and they're desperately unhappy. Having more will not make you more valuable, because your value is not to be confused with your valuables. And your self-worth should not be confused with your net worth. And having more will not make you more secure. You know why? Because you can lose it all. You can lose it all. You can lose $1 million in a day. And you need to find your security in something that will last. And that is only your relationship with God. Ecclesiastes 4 verse 6 says this: it is better to only have a little with peace of mind than to be busy all the time with both hands trying to catch the wind. This is what I call the Loudoun County syndrome. We go out and we buy things we can't afford with money we don't have to impress people we don't even like. And then we get in debt and we have to become workaholics to pay for all the things that we've bought. Listen, if you own something and God came along and told you to give it away, think about this. Think of something that you own, that you enjoy, that you love, that you worked hard for and you bought it. Think about something that you get pleasure from. If you own that and God spoke into your mind and said, I want you to give that away to somebody, and you can't do that, what's happened there? What's happened there is that you are possessed by your possessions. We are never to be possessed by our possessions. And the third key to contentment, so I said never compare. Stop thinking having more is better. And the third is, and I promise I'm finishing now, is to learn to admire without having to acquire. Someone taught me this years ago, and it's brilliant. It's so simple. Learn to admire without having to acquire. I find this personally fun for me. What I mean by this is I don't have to own it in order to enjoy it. Because the fact is, right, that ownership is a lot of pain most of the time, right? You got to insure it, you got to maintain it, you got to store it, you got to haul it, right? But listen, you don't have to own it to enjoy it. You can rent it, you can borrow it, you can try someone else's. Listen, I can stay at your lake house. I can have a shot on your jet ski. I can have a little drive in your sports car. I don't have to own it. I don't have to acquire it. I can admire it. You with me? So a few of you I'll be speaking to later. Let me finish. These 5 strategies that I've given you, super easy to explain, hard to do. It's not easy to worry about nothing. It's not easy to pray about everything. It's not easy to thank God in everything. It's not easy to always think about good things. And it's not easy to be content with anything. So where in the world am I going to get the energy to do these things and reduce the stress in my life? Because if it wasn't for stress, I'd have no energy at all. God says, come to me, and I'll give you both the power and the ability to do what will help you. Philippians 4 verse 13 is our last verse for this week. It's the most famous one. I have the strength to face anything and everything by the power that Christ gives me. Perhaps you've heard it like this. I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. You know that verse? I told you at the beginning, it's the Steph Curry verse. You know, it's on all his merchandise. You know, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Like as if God helps you dunk a basketball. I hope that you can see that in the context where that verse appears, that he's not talking about the way that that verse is often applied, you know. Well, I'm going to do this thing. Well, you go for it because you can do all things through Christ who strengthens you. What is the context? The context is in these 5 things. What does he give you the strength to do? To not worry about things? To pray about things? To give thanks in things? To think about the right things? And to be content. And God will give you the strength to do those 5 things. Let's bow our heads and pray. Let's pray together. My blessing on you this week comes from Romans 15. It says, I pray that God who gives peace will be with you. So would you make this simple prayer your own? It doesn't really matter what words you say, but as I say this, maybe you just say, me too. Just say, me too. Dear Lord, I don't really want to be stressed out. I want to learn the habits of happiness. And you promised in this passage that if I do these things, that I will experience your peace, a peace that passes understanding. And I know that I don't have the strength to do these things. So Jesus Christ, I need you to give me that strength. Help me to not worry about things. And help me to pray about everything. Instead of talking to myself, to talk to you. Help me to give thanks in all things, that even in the difficult moments to find something to be grateful for. And I ask that you teach me to be content with anything, so that I may have the peace of God. Because once I have peace with God, I can have the peace of God and can have peace with other people. And I pray this in your name.